Hi, welcome to another episode of Suddenly Single, and tonight I am extremely excited. I've got with me Michael Brandon, who is best known by us British people, because we fell in love with them both, for being one half of Dempsey and Makepeace. So Lieutenant Dempsey is with us today.
I just wanna get out of here.
So before we continue, I'd just like to thank you for watching our channel. We really do appreciate it. But please subscribe by clicking the button and maybe drop us a comment. We really do appreciate all of your feedback, and we hope to keep bringing you this great show. Now back to the show. Michael Brandon is here to talk about his new book called That's All I'm Saying, which is an opportunity to relive your life, isn't it, really, Michael? Writing the book was.
Well said. It is an opportunity to really, because I always used to think about if I could go back to that time, that classroom, or that moment, or something like that. And this kind of afforded that opportunity, yes, to go back and relive your life. Yeah.
So I read that you fell in love with movies when you were 8. Did you go and see a particular film or something? What was that spark?
Well, I was a lonely kid. I grew up in a Brooklyn ghetto. Then we moved to Queens, and it was tough. You had to cross neighborhoods to go to anywhere or from anywhere. And I used to go to the movies, and they were double features with cartoons.
Oh yes, was that Saturday Morning Pictures? Did you have that?
So you go, and I think it was 25 cents to go to the movies, and I remember it was the War of the Worlds.
Okay.
I watched it twice through, and I was scared walking home. I kept thinking those snaky little pink arms were going to come out and grab my leg.
Do you know, when I found out that you were coming in, it reminded me of how much Britain fell in love with Dempsey and Makepeace. And when I looked it up, I couldn't believe it was only 3 series, 30 episodes. But it exploded around the world, didn't it? It was
did.
huge.
It was. It was something that the people decided.
Yeah.
It was the public watching. There were 20 million people who tuned in to watch a unique experience, because there I was doing this show. We didn't know how long it was going to go. I signed on to do 11 episodes, I think it was. It was the first season. It was no first or second. It was just the way it was. And then there was a second, and this became a relationship, and people were watching this relationship. So
Well, we wanted to work in real life. We did. And it was funny, actually. I told my current boyfriend that I was interviewing you today, and he said, "Oh my God, I had his wife on my wall all the time when I was a kid." We were all obsessed with it. We were obsessed with both of you. That was the interesting thing. We loved her as much as we loved you, and the whole relationship between this street smart American cop and this very posh British woman.
yes, it was.
Who you went on to fall in love with and marry, didn't you?
I did.
Yes.
I did. I mean, and the thing was, you go back and you watch it, and there is it happening. I tried to show it to my son. He had no interest.
Did he not?
No.
Your
I
son
said,
has never watched
look at that. That's
Dempsey
where
and
I met your
Makepeace.
mom,
So what, Dad?
But, yeah.
That's where you became a global icon and moved to Britain. And was it Glynis that made you move to Britain? Was she homesick?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I bought my first house in my life, in Hampstead.
Okay.
And Glynis showed me Hampstead. We were in the very early shows, and we were shooting in the Hampstead Heath. And she said, we're right near the village. Why don't we go there for lunch?
Uh-huh.
So, I didn't know anything. I didn't know where. Well, I got in the car, and he took me to another location. And so we walked over to the village, and it was what every American imagines Britons to look like. This village, bookshops, and all these things on a hilly street. And it was amazing. And, I fell in love with it. But so I bought my first house after renting for a couple of years. And then that's the first place Glenn and I lived together. actually.
And you've been with us ever since, and we're delighted.
Yeah, there you go.
Do you know that's over 40 years ago, the first episode of...
It's exactly 40 years
Yeah.
ago. March
Where
was
does
when we
time
started
go?
March 84,
Yeah.
which is 40 years ago. It's unbelievable.
Did I get this story right, that you told me you were swimming in the sea, and Glynis saw you coming out of the water and said, "That's a nice body," before she even...
I think that was
clapped
Bo
eyes on you?
Derek. No, I actually... in 10.
Is
No,
that-
actually...
That's... Yeah?
Yeah, I did. There was a,
Before she actually met you and
no,
realised
that's
that
not
you were
before.
the co-star?
No. She met me and didn't like me. That was at the Ritz Hotel. It was our first meeting. This was a very unusual show because in America, if they were doing, let's say, this police show, and they have 2 actors, they would have in 100 different actors at least,
Okay.
and pair them up and audition them down, and everybody would come into the room and all the executives, and it would go down until they had 10 couples, 5 couples, 4 couples, like that.
Yeah.
And all the tests they would do. Nothing like that happened. I met the 2 producers in L.A.
Yeah.
I was in development deal for a script I wrote at 20th Century Fox, and my agents convinced me it was time that I did a series. I said, I don't want to do a TV series. I just like doing television movies and movies.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a stigma then that movie actors didn't do television.
Yeah.
But anyway, I said, no, I'm not interested. They called me in for a meeting, and they said, do you know how much money you didn't make? I said, how could I know that? We do. You didn't do this, you didn't do that. I said, wait a second. There were series like Family Ties with Michael J. Fox
yes.
playing the dad.
Okay. And you turned all these roles down? You
Yeah,
just said
I
no.
didn't want to do a series that seemed like a regular job to me. I just like, you get turned on, you find a part you like, you go do it. But yeah, so they read me the act, the winds of change, because if you don't do one, all the series now have huge casts like Dallas and Dynasty and St. Elsewhere Medical and the L.A. Law.
Yeah.
So all these actors are enticed to sign up for another season if they give them TV movies. That's your forte. You've done dozens, but it's going to dry up because the directors can't choose who they want anymore. The network has obligations to give these people these jobs to keep the series together.
Okay.
So that was good agenting.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, okay, boom, they bring out 10 scripts. I took
Okay.
them back to my office, and I'm chucking them into the bin one after the other. And then there was one on funny paper, A4.
Okay.
It was skinnier and
Yeah.
longer.
We've still got it.
Indeed. And I said, oh, I like this one. Well, that was a mistake. We shouldn't have sent you that one. I said, no, I like this character. And I said, but you're not right for the part. They don't want to see you. I said, you're the biggest agency in the world. Right? So they got me a meeting. And you could tell it was one of those favored meetings, and because these 2 guys were packing their bags to leave. And I'm standing in the doorway. And I said, okay, I understand that you think I'm not right for this character. And I'm not, because they were looking for a California millionaire, James Dempsey III. And I said, I don't think those dynamics are really as interesting as if you made this guy a New York homicide detective right out of the gutter. He'll teach her the true meaning of the bard's words, this lady, Harriet Makepeace. And thank you for your time, and I left.
Yeah.
They called me from the airport. They said, we've changed our flight to the later flight, and we want to come back and put what you said on tape. And that's it. History.
Is it true, Glynis said, when you met in the hotel room and she wasn't impressed, this man is a nightmare?
She said I was she
Yeah,
told
she
her
did.
boyfriend I was a nightmare.
Because she had a boyfriend at the time,
She
didn't
did
she?
have a boyfriend at the time. That was the problem.
So you liked her from day one?
Well, she was very attractive.
She's still very attractive.
She is. She's gorgeous. She's amazing. And, she was different and refreshing. And I'd been a single guy for quite a while now. And, when you're working hours like we were working, and we didn't even have a weekend off for like the the first 3 weeks or so, because we had to get like Tower of London, all these, the Pall Mall, places that we could only get to. So, yeah, we were working quite a lot, and I would always be asking her out. You know, you want to have coffee or shower? You know, I mean,
shower?
Yeah, well, you know, listen, it was a different time.
Give it a go.
Today, you can't say the things that flirting.
Yeah, no, you can't do that now.
Flirting was an art. Flirting was a way of life. It was like a buzz. You know, you're sitting on a set. You know, for.
It was funny though. Would you like a coffee or a shower? I think that would have made me laugh. I read though.
It could have been lines from Dempsey.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Did you ask for her to be recast at one point because she were getting on each other's nerves to that degree?
I was an ass.
You were an horse's
you know,
arse.
I mean, it still have that potential, but you know, it was, it got problematic because she said to me, "You got to stop," you know, and I stopped. You know, I didn't start coming on to it because it was upsetting her boyfriend.
Okay.
And so I you know, I'm not I'm not insensitive. So yeah, of course. But it was really the energy between the characters. It kept that buzz going. You know, you got to keep working. You know, because you got a lot of boring hours sitting around or freezing to death on the docks where we shot most of it.
Yeah.
And then So I said, look, maybe we should recast. And they said, yeah, sure, we're looking. Meanwhile, they're loving what they're seeing. So, and that's what the public saw.
Yes.
The public saw this chemistry going on. It was happening, and you may not consciously know what's actually going on, but you get it. It was also very hard for a woman starring in a show at that time because it was a very misogynistic business. Mm-hmm. There were very few women executives, women directors, women writers. So she stood up for herself, you know, and she did well by herself. And, you know, so it had to be a joint effort. I mean, she had no trailer. Right?
She had no trailer?
No, she was changing in the wardrobe bus. They put up a little curtain where all the actors...
And you had a trailer?
Of course I had a trailer. It was in my contract. That's the difference between American actors and English actors.
Wow.
I did a whole play about this. Anyway, yeah, so I would let her use my loo.
Oh, that was kind of you.
It was. You know, but after the first season, you know, if we were arguing, it got a little difficult. You know, I could cut off her loo rights. You know, but... Anyway, what I did was
toilet visits.
I went to the producers.
This
and
woman has a great sense of humour. You've been married for 35 years, right? You're cutting off her toilet rights. I don't know how you ever got her.
That's you know, I think that's the saving grace of all of it was sense of humor, is laughing.
Yeah.
I went to the producers and I said, look, in my contract, I know I have this enormous motorhome, but the fact is, we can't get that motorhome anywhere near we're shooting because it's too big for these little streets or, you know, so half the time I'd get out of the trailer, get into a car, be driven to the set where we're actually filming, and I never got back there until like lunchtime. So I said, why don't we get rid of that thing and get two smaller ones that are able to get to the set, and then she can have one. And they said it wasn't in her contract. I said, obviously it wasn't. But what I'm giving you...
How close we were to that time, really. That's within our lifetime. No votes for women, no trailers for women, no... Really?
Yeah. And so that's how it worked out. We got these two much smaller things. Each one had a loo and a little, you know, table and and it was all we needed.
Yeah.
And it made it a happier camp, you know.
Yeah. So... while you were in Malibu, which is where you were promoting the show, you showed her some land. And that's when things started to change between us. Is that correct?
Me and Glynis?
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Yes, no?
This is after the tour.
Yeah.
Yes, the tour, she didn't like me. She wouldn't fly with me. So she didn't talk to me in New York. We traveled to Chicago. We took a walk to get away from the press for a minute. And San Francisco, we had a meal. I think she said, pass the salt. And then we got to L.A. and we were at the same hotel, and my friends all came over. All my guys they came over, and I introduced them, and they loved her. They were going, "Wow, she's amazing." I said, "You think so?" And they said, "Oh yeah, she's different. She's unique. She's really special, really." After what I told you, and they said, "Yeah, you think she's really special?" Yeah. It was like I started to see her through fresh eyes.
Okay.
And we were out of the Dempsey Makepeace, bubble.
Yeah.
And I took her up to show her this land that I had in Malibu. It was a mountaintop. There were caves in the rocks, Indian caves, and drawings. And I was going to build a place where the rocks came inside and glass would surround it. That was my dream. And that's why I did the series.
Okay.
And I took her up there to show it to her. And when we came down to the beach from the mountain, it was sunset.
Uh-huh.
And we took a walk along the beach, and it was really funny. We were laughing. We were easy with each other. And it wasn't Dempsey and Makepeace. It was Glynis and Michael.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, there was a smile in her eyes.
Okay.
And she was leaving the next morning, and she said goodbye. And I saw that smile, and, But that could have been the last time I saw it, because at that point, we did not know whether Dempsey and Makepeace would have a second season.
Oh.
We were done.
Okay. Wow. But fate did not have that in store for you, did it?
I guess not.
And do you know another thing that fate had in store for you? You took part in the infamous, I should say, Royal It's a Knockout, didn't you?
I knew you were going to say that. I had no idea what I was doing.
Why? What? Why did you agree? Because Prince Edward asked you.
Well, I was staying at my mate's house in L.A.
Uh-huh.
My friend Andy, he's gone now, but Andy answered the phone, and he said, "Yeah, but who is it really?" And come on, He said, "Some guy says he's Prince Edward." So I said, "Give me the phone." "Oh, hello, Your Royal Highness. How are you? How'd you find me?" "I don't know." But, he said, "The Duchess of York would like you to be one of her knights in a jousting games." Well,
Did
I
you
said,
know what
"I'm in."
jousting was?
Yeah, I've seen movies,
Okay.
So I said to Andy after the call, I said, "Do you think we could find a jousting instructor, a tutor? I have to learn how to joust, And anyway, yeah, that's what I thought it was.
Yeah.
And then they said, I got a call from Prince Edward again when I was back in London, and he said, "You need to come to Buckingham.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be a gathering of everyone, and then there'll also be the royal fitters." So I thought, right. And I'm thinking flat black armor,
Yeah.
That's in my mind. So I'm talking to the fitters, and I said, I'm thinking a flat black, with this, maybe not even an
You're directing
insignia or
again.
something like that. They must have been in hysterics when I left the room. I wound up with this giant rubber feet and a big, silly costume. But I didn't know.
But you know what? It was fun. It was fun. Whatever else gets said about
Well,
it
it was for
fun.
charity, So.
Yeah, exactly. And you also met Princess Diana at the ballet one time, didn't you?
Mm-hmm.
Is it true that Prince Charles, as he was at the time, now the king, retied your tie?
It is.
Why?
Well, what happened was I wanted to just do something to put a bit back in, because I felt the British had been very kind to me. I was so welcome to this country, and I was really enjoying my living here. And so I thought, what can I do? So I put together a little reel, and he said, "You got an exhibition." So what I did was I decided to do it for the Prince's Trust. So we raised a good amount of money. Anyway, I forgot the question.
It was about why Prince Charles.
The tie.
King Charles.
I was
sorry.
given the tie,
Yes.
which had Charles's crest
Yes.
on it as a thank you for my donation to the
Okay.
charity, and then invited to Wembley for the Prince's Trust concert.
Oh yeah.
So I had seen Diana at the ballet earlier that week. I don't know, Glynis might have been working, and they brought down the curtain like in the middle of the show, not for intermission, and then I was taken to a room to wait afterwards. And then they bring in Princess Diana, right? And she's hysterical. And I said, "What? Why? Do you know why they cut the lights, pulled the curtain? I mean, what?" And she couldn't get a straight face. She was just crying with laughter. And she said, "The Beast got a hernia when he lifted up Beauty." Well, so that was pretty funny. So here we are in the marquee at the Wembley, Prince's Trust concert, and Princess Diana is going up one way, and Prince Charles is going up another way, and I'm standing at the end of these two lines where he will come and thank me personally.
Yeah.
And I'm wearing his tie. And Diana gets there first, looks at me, and cracks up. And I said, "I know. How ridiculous was that? The Beast gets a hernia." And then she said, "What are you wearing?" And I said, "It's Charles's tie." She said, "It's naff." And she starts to pull it off. And then Prince Charles arrives and goes, "You're wearing my tie." And I said, "Yes, it was crooked, and Her Royal Highness was just helping me. Let me do that." And he fixed the tie perfectly. "Thank you." And yeah, that's how that happened.
Lots of practice. So obviously you're now married to Glynis, but in the book you go way back when, right to school, where you wrote your first love letter to a girl in your class, didn't you?
What a mistake. If there's times you can go back and change the world. I had come from very, what can I say, modest, poor. We lived in a development. And my father's doing bit business. He's got his own garage now, and he was in the Army. He was Master Sergeant Motor Divisions. So he maintained being a mechanic with two Army buddies, and they were doing all right. So we moved from Queens to Valley Stream, just over the city line to Long Island, or Long Island, as my mother said, right? And so this school, it's later in the year. I think I'm 9, and it's progressive, which meant I was the missing link. Because when I wrote my name on the board, everybody laughed. They couldn't read it, And then they put a bunch of books on my desk. I said, "You want me to pass these out?" He said, "No, they're yours." I said, "I have to carry these every day." They said, "You put them in your locker." "What's a locker?" And laughed at me again. Anyway, my only solace was that this girl, Trudy, sat in front of me, and I could smell her hair. And she was beautiful, and I used to dream, about Trudy, and so I couldn't contain it.
How old?
9.
9?
Yeah.
Oh.
So, and...
I bet Trudy regrets that now.
Well, I wrote all this down, and I can't believe it. I signed it, "Your Secret Admirer," and then I snuck it into her desk. But as soon as she opened it, she recognized the sideways handwriting was mine. And she stands up and she goes, "Mrs. Earle, he wrote me a secret admirer letter." If there's a moment you want to disappear or shrink up into your testicle sack, which was what was left on that chair, it was a tough moment.
It was a life lesson.
It is, because you put yourself out there, and it could go either way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you were only 9. I'm sure by the time you were a teenager, you had the girls flocking,
It
right?
was a late blooming, let me tell you.
You were
It was
a late bloomer.
Yeah, I used to make a list of like 10 names to ask to a party or a prom.
10?
Yeah, and wind up with 11. Freddie was 11. She had a mustache a little thicker than mine, but she was very nice. And she always said yes. It was like all that rejection, I think is what...
made you tough.
Yeah.
We love Freddie, though. She said yes.
I wonder what happened to Freddie. Freddie Joseph was her name.
Freddie Joseph, if you're out there, meet Michael Brandon. He thanks you for every school dance you attended with him.
Yeah. Otherwise, I never
So
would have gone.
when did you become like the sort of heartthrob hunk then?
It was... I used to write this depressing poetry, and I used to listen to... strange music, and I was a kind of a chameleon. I would fit in with the tough guys so as not to get picked on.
Okay.
That was a survival technique. But it wasn't comfortable. It wasn't where I felt that there was a guy who's still my friend.
Yeah.
And this goes back to high school. He was 2 years ahead of me, but he was a nerd. He was an academic. Yeah. But I saved him from getting beat up by these guys who I was kind of hanging out with, and we became friends. So on the weekends, I would go with him to like a foreign film or a gallery, and he opened up my mind, that was seeking some other life, whereas I was like one of the animals during the week. So I was surviving, and I was lonely, and I didn't want to be this, I didn't want to be that, until I found myself, I think, at acting school.
Which is amazing.
And then I found people like me.
Yeah.
They were all kind of like a little strange, or a little bit not strange, like familiar. They were relaxed. They weren't about the baloney that went on in school. Yeah. It was about who you are, what you do, what do you want.
Find your tribe, isn't it?
Expression and feeling. Yeah, it was finding my people.
Yeah, you were married to the Bionic Woman, weren't you?
I was.
Lindsay Wagner. Yes. I used to love that show. I wanted to be the Bionic Woman. I wanted to be rebuilt.
Yeah. It became. She wasn't when I met her. But it became this huge. She was the biggest TV star in America, maybe the world.
Probably the world at one point.
Yeah, it was huge.
The Bionic Woman. So this show is called Suddenly Single. You are clearly happily married for 35 years. So if I'm to turn it on its head and ask you to give single guys out there who are getting divorced, because this whole show span out of a friend of mine, a guy friend of mine, both over 50. Just going, honestly, there is nobody decent to meet out there. Let's podcast about it. We started doing this together. He's stopped doing it. But what advice would you give to people to, like, how have you made it work for 35 years? And how have you've gone from being quite shy and unconfident to someone who clearly knows how to get the girls. So what advice would you give to guys who are over 50 now, out there looking again? What would you say to them? You really worked hard at getting Glynis, right?
Well, practice makes perfect. I didn't get it right. You go up to a girl at the beach and say, "What time does the ocean close?" Doesn't work anymore.
Okay. Okay, forget that line then.
Yeah. Listen. You got to listen.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to listen. And that's what it is. I think it's harder for people now because the communication has gone down, not up. Mm-hmm. I think the invention of these phones and texting hasn't done anybody a favor. I think there's only so much feeling or expression you can put in your fingertips. It's actually sitting with a person and looking at them and seeing what you like about them, what you appreciate, what happens in their eyes. Mm-hmm. It's that spark. That's what they saw in Dempsey and Makepeace. They saw the spark happening. Yeah. And I wasn't even aware of it. Because, the camera reads what it wants to read, as long as something's going on.
Yeah.
But I have some single friends, and I've seen the troubles they've gone through because you get set in your ways.
Yes, you do.
And that's a good and a bad thing. It's nice to know what you're comfortable with, but you also have to be able to change. Mm-hmm. You got to allow. You got to open up. I actually had one of my best friends with a girl who was an A. She was 10. She was great. She was smart. She was beautiful. She was warm and wonderful. And they hit it off, and they're two great people. And he said, come live with me. And so she brought her bags and came in. And then she said to him, what's all the tape on the floor? And he said, well, that's my area and your area. And I never knew this about him. And I said, he did what? You know, I mean, I was gobsmacked. I mean, he said,
I might get
so
the
there was a
tape out
no-go
later.
area for me, and there was my area. And I said, that's ridiculous. She said, well, I just left. I said, well, that'll pull up the tape. You know, it's not going to work that way. But so there's an extreme. But
That is an extreme, but you know what I would have done? I would have just laughed and said, where's the wine? Because we're pulling up the tape and you're going to have to get over that. There's no mine in your space here. So you're right. It's about compromise as you get older.
yeah, it is, and it's about listening. Listen, you know, my father used to say, "I'm going to walk the dog." We didn't have a dog, you know, but that was his way of getting out and taking a walk around the block and coping with that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's a lot of falling in love and falling out of love in my book. I had pimples and I had no face till I was 20. You know, I was bland. But being that gave me inner sight, gave me inner knowledge to learn. You know, these things turn into blessings later. There was one girl who I just got beat up by a bully in the school. I was laying on the ground bleeding, right? And all of a sudden a tissue starts to white. I flinched, and I look, and it's one of these girls who was on the list of 10, but I could never get her, you know.
Aww.
And I just said, thank you. And she helped me up and walked me to where we split to her home, go to her, and we became friends. And I forgot about all that. And I was going back to my yearbook from high school, and because I needed a couple of pictures and things. And also I didn't want to name the bully, but he wasn't in it because he obviously didn't graduate.
Oh, brilliant.
But anyway, yeah, and this girl, her picture, there it was, and it said, "See back." And I flipped to the back, and there's this whole letter, and she goes, "You were there for me. You listened to me. You understood me, and you helped me through a very difficult time. And I'll never forget what a fantastic summer we had."
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And you didn't know that?
No.
No. Wow.
Yeah, I'm coming up, I'm coming.
So we're back with Bianca Best. Great name for this show, can I just say?
Thank you.
Relationship expert.
One of the biggest challenges in relationships is that sort of command and control, the assumption that your way is the right way and everyone else is wrong, and it's never going to work at all. So you must have really created this lovely, beautiful way.
You give me a lot more credit than I'm due. I mean, you know, she'll say, "Happy wife, happy life." Yeah, right.
True.
Yeah.
You see, you just have to walk the dog. You got to go process it. You got to let it sit and realize, pick your battles.
Uh-huh.
You know, you don't have to win all the battles to get to the war. And you know, it's like so. We've always disagreed. We disagree more than we agree. You know, but it's like
Yin and
I'm
yang.
more of a okay. So what?
Right. So this is called the Suddenly Single Honesty Box. And all you do is, we don't leave you hanging. We can answer them as well. But we each take a question. They're not very difficult. And the writing's terrible and it's mine. So, you know, that's all I can say.
Can't be worse than mine.
Do you want
That's
one?
for me,
Shall
I
give it to
guess.
you?
I'll take
It doesn't
that.
matter. It doesn't matter. I think I might take a different one. Right. Oh, right. I think, Michael, you might have a good answer
Well,
for yours.
How do you feel about picking up the tab at a first date? Well, that's the way it always was for me. It was like you always paid for the girl. You took her out, and it's still to this day. we have my wife's single friends, and if they come, I feel like I should pay the bill.
Okay.
So
I love that old-fashioned manners.
I love
Absolutely
that too.
love that.
Chivalry. Let it run.
We've
You'd
been
win
our own
that.
worst enemies. No seats on the
Exactly.
train, no picking up the tab. I mean, honestly, and go to work as well, girls.
Yeah,
Off you go.
exactly.
Bye-bye.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I love your old-fashioned manners. I think they're wonderful. What is yours?
Who is your celeb crush? There's only one way I can answer this. Sitting next to you. And I actually had your poster in my bedroom when I was a little girl. Yeah, I was obsessed with Dempsey and Makepeace.
Oh my God.
Absolutely. So yeah, here you are. This is one of those, full circle life moments.
Thank you.
Wonderful to meet you and be here. So there you go.
Oh, Bianca best.
So mine is a weird one. If you were on your first holiday, would it be a city break or a beach escape? Ideally, beach escape, no question.
Yeah,
No
I agree.
question.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Absolutely.
Anywhere.
Maldives.
That is amazing. You have been a brilliant guest on Suddenly
Oh.
Single. I really have enjoyed having you here.
Thank you,
And
Sharon.
I've enjoyed you as well, Bianca. You
Thank
will
you
be
so
back.
much.
With
Thank
a
you
name
for
like
having me.
Best, how can I not have you back?
Thank you.